I'm Alyssa Langell. I'm a project coordinator in the data management department at ECOG-ACRIN. So I'm here to talk about RECIST 1.1. I don't have the most time, so we're going to focus on the most common questions and the most common queries. So how does RECIST work? The goal of RECIST is we're going to start by determining the extent of all disease or tumor burden present at baseline. We're then going to compare the status of disease at each follow-up assessment to baseline and to the smallest sum of diameters during the trial and determine if there are any changes. Those changes will determine response. So at baseline, we're going to have a scan or evaluate all sites of disease that are present at study entry. Those will be categorized into target lesions and non-target lesions. And then the baseline RECIST forms will need to be completed with appropriate lesions and measurements. So when we're looking at these baseline lesions, all sites of disease must be reported, including suspicious sites. Lesions must be scanned within the protocol window. This will typically be within 4 weeks of registration, but this may be protocol specific. So make sure you're looking at section 3 to determine what that appropriate window is. And then also check your protocol for acceptable methods of evaluation. This could be in section 3, and it could also be in section 6. So this is the RAVE baseline RECIST form. Sorry. And as you can see, it's going to ask you, oh, it's really tiny. So you're going to see it's going to ask you if there's any target lesions and if there's any non-target lesions. Target lesions are lesions that meet measurability criteria. There are different rules if it's a nodal target lesion or a non-nodal target lesion. And these definitions, I'm going to go over them, but they're also in section 6 of the protocol. Section 6 will contain all information on RECIST if you are working on a RECIST trial. So nodal target lesions are lymph nodes. And a measurable or target lesion is going to be greater than 15 millimeters on the short axis. Non-target lesions that are lymph nodes are going to be between 10 and 15 millimeters on the short axis, and then non-pathologic / subclinical lymph nodes are those that are less than 10 millimeters. When we're looking at non-nodal target lesions, the determination of measurability will be determined by which scan type of evaluation you're using. So it must be greater or equal to 10 millimeters on the long axis when evaluated with a CT scan or MRI. It should be greater than or equal to 20 millimeters long axis when evaluated with a chest X-ray, and greater than or equal to 10 millimeters along the long axis when evaluated by calipers. Non-target lesions are pathologic lesions too small to be considered target lesions, or lesions not qualifying as target lesions due to the restriction on the number of targets from a single site, or the total number of target lesions. So when we're looking at target lesions, there should only be 2 lesions per site. This includes lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are considered one site, so you should not list more than 2 lymph nodes as a target lesions. And then we don't want more than 5 lesions total for target lesions. And then we also have truly non-measurable lesions. Typically, these are bone lesions, pleural pericardial effusions and astases, inflammatory breast disease, lymphangitis, cutis pulmonosus, and cystic lesions. And these are also listed in section 6.1. Occasionally, bone lesions will be accepted if it's mostly in the soft tissues. So please, once again, refer to section 6 of the protocol to double check the non-measurable lesions. So baseline RECIST, once you respond, if there are any target lesions, you will then be asked if there are any non-nodal target lesions or any nodal target lesions. Nodal and non-nodal lesions are going to be reported on separate forms. So as you can see in this case, are there any target lesions was reported yes, which rolled out are there any target lesions, any non-nodal target lesions, any nodal target lesions, and any unmeasurable lesions. Because yes has responded to all of them, it has now rolled out the appropriate forms. So the baseline non-nodal lesion form looks like this. In CDISC studies, there's going to be a pretty detailed form instructions, similar to the data we just reviewed. So it's going to go over the fact that you should only have 2 lesions per site, and the specific measurements for target lesions. So on this form, we're going to ask for a lesion number, an anatomic site of the lesion, and a site of lesion specify. Then the method of evaluation, the date of evaluation, and the longest diameter. Once again, this is the baseline lesion form, so please make sure you're reporting the baseline scan, which is in that expected eligibility window. A patient may have multiple scans, but please make sure this is specifically the baseline scan. So this is what it would look like if there are 2 lung lesions. Please note that so they both have the anatomic site of lung, but the site specified really clarifies which lung nodule is each. This is important. We need to keep track of them consistently through each reporting period. They're also numbered consecutively. And at the bottom of this form, there is an add a log line if you are missing target lesions, and there's also an inactivate. Baseline nodal target lesions forms are similar. You have a lesion number. Lesion numbers for all target lesions should be continuous. So we had lung lesions 1 and 2. Our nodal target lesion is going to be lesion number 3. It's the nodal target lesion form, so the only anatomic location available on this form is nodes. And the site specified, so you can specify which lymph node, the method of evaluation, date of evaluation, and the shortest axis of the lesion. So like I said, this lesion is lesion number 3. All target lesions are numbered consecutively. And then we have our baseline non-target lesions. So any non-target lesions should go on this form. Non-target lesions are labeled separately from target lesions. So because these are the non-target lesions, we start again, where we have a lesion number 1 and a lesion number 2. As you can see, the first one is another lung lesion. This is because there were already 2 lung lesions, so we could not have a third one as a target lesion. And then number 2 is an effusion, which is always a non-measurable lesion. Then you get the baseline RECIST summary form. This is where you're going to put your baseline measurement, which is the sum of the longest non-nodal and the shortest nodal axis of the target lesions. So for example, from the ones I showed you, there were the 2 lung lesions combined, added up to 73. The 1 nodal lesion was 17, and so you would get a total of 90. And these are recorded in millimeters. This is also important. Please make sure you're reporting them in millimeters and not centimeters. So once we complete baseline, we then have our follow-up. Once again, it's important to scan/evaluate all sites of disease that were present at baseline. It's important to use the same method of evaluation that was used at baseline. This is a protocol requirement. If you change the method of evaluation, it will be considered a deviation. One of the exceptions is CT scans to PET CT scans, where if you're using the CT scan of a PET CT and it is considered the same diagnostic quality as the previous CT, as a plain CT, it can be used interchangeably, but you may get queries from data management asking you to confirm that that is the same quality as a CT. And you will not recategorize lesions. All lesion numbers should be exactly the same for target lesions and non-target lesions. And then, based on that data, you're going to determine response. So the disease follow-up form, it asks you if there has been an evaluation, and if there has been systematic deterioration. So if there has been, if the patient has had an evaluation, this reporting period, you can see it's in purple. That's because it's going to roll out the appropriate RECIST forms. And then it also asks if there's been systematic deterioration. So yep, the appearance, and there's also the question, if there was a disease evaluation, that will also roll out the question, were there any new lesions? So the non-nodal target lesion form, what's both good and bad about the follow-up form is you can select, would you like to carry forward the information from baseline? This is useful because it will keep your information on the lesion number, the anatomic site, and the site specified the same as it was reported as baseline. The one problem with this is you can only use it once. So let's say that you entered your baseline, you then carried forward your target lesions from baseline, but let's say you accidentally added too many lesions. Let's say you did report that third lesion, that third lung lesion as a target lesion. And you then go back and change baseline to remove it. If this form had already been rolled out and you already moved it forward, you would then have to amend this form as well. So please keep that in mind. If you change information at baseline and have already rolled out follow-up forms, you may have to manually go in and change the follow-up forms. Nodal target lesion is similar, and it also has the ability to be rolled forward. As you can see, we kept all the numbers the same. This is still target lesion number 3. And what I want to talk about next is the evaluated but unable to be measured checkbox. This will often be queried by data management if it is checked, because if it's evaluated but unable to be measured, it's going to be considered not adequate for appropriate disease evaluation. That is considered a deviation. So, 2 common reasons why this may be checked, but the scan is adequate, is if the lesion becomes too small to measure, but has not disappeared, it should be coded as 5 millimeters. Or if a lesion has completely resolved, a measurement of 0 millimeters should be entered. So please make sure about if the other 2 apply before checking evaluated but unable to be measured, because you will be queried to confirm. Then we have our non-target lesions, which are similar. These will have a section for you to report if they have been, what the status of them are. So if they're non-CR/non-progressive disease versus complete response or progressive disease. Non-target lesions only have those three options. And then we get to the RECIST summary form, where you're going to put in the sum of the lesions again, and it will ask you, was there enough information to determine response? So how do we determine response, and how will we know that we are able to determine response? So overall response requires us to look at our target lesions, our non-target lesions, and our new lesions. Section 6 in the protocol, once again, is very helpful and will help you see if you have enough information to report response. This is helpful when you look at the remarks section. So the remarks section will let you know if this is a study where a follow-up scan is required. Like if it's a confirmation trial, you may not be able to report partial response on that first scan if it requires a confirmation. This study is not a confirmation study, so there's not any of that in the remarks. However, there is a specific time interval to report stable disease. This is common throughout all RECIST studies, so please make sure you're checking that the time interval for stable disease has been met in order to report it. So what does complete response mean? Complete response, we want the disappearance of all non-nodal target lesions, a reduction in short axis of all nodal target and nodal non-target lesions to less than 10 millimeters. Remember, less than 10 millimeters means that it has become non-clinical, subclinical. And then we want to see the disappearance of all non-nodal, non-target lesions. And there should be no new lesions, and we are going to discuss what constitutes a new lesion. Partial response, so the target lesion partial response is going to be at least a 30% decrease in the sum of axis of target lesions when compared to baseline. So for partial response, we're comparing our new sum to the baseline. And then when we're looking at, is it an overall partial response? We could have the target lesions have complete response, but if those non-target lesions have not resolved, it would be a partial response. If we had complete response in the target lesions, but then the non-target lesions were not evaluated, that would be partial response. But you can report response. You do have enough information to report a response, even if not all non-target lesions were evaluated. It would just be partial response in this case. And then if your target lesions are partial response and you have that non-PD, non-CR, or just not evaluated nodal target lesions, it can still be reported as partial response. So stable disease is when the criteria for complete response, partial response, or progressive disease are not met. And as I pointed out earlier, Section 6 of the protocol will define the minimum time frame required between the start of treatment and follow-up scan for stable disease to be reported. If that minimum stable disease time frame is not met, it should be coded as insufficient evaluation to determine response. Then we get to progressive disease. This is a 20% increase in the sum of the axis of target lesions when compared to the smallest sum of target lesions reported. So while progressive disease is compared only to baseline, progressive disease is going to be compared to the smallest axis reported. So you'll want to check that compared to every follow-up cycle reported before that one to look for the smallest one to compare it to. It also has to be a greater than 5 millimeter increase over that smallest sum of target lesions, because a lot of times once we get down to having only like 10 millimeters, you may have an increase of then 2 millimeters to up to 12 millimeters, but that would still not be sufficient for progressive disease. And or the presence of new lesions will constitute progressive disease. A new lesion is a lesion identified on a follow-up study in an anatomical location that was, so a lesion identified on a follow-up study in an anatomical location that was not scanned at baseline is considered a new lesion. So for example, an MRI is not required at the beginning of a lot of studies, but you may have an MRI in a follow-up evaluation. The brain met in that, if the subject has a brain met in that MRI, it is considered a new lesion. Then if a new lesion is considered equivocal, for example, because of its small size, you can continue therapy and follow-up evaluation will clarify if it represents truly new disease. But once again, expect a query on the new lesion form because we are looking for that clarification. And previously, new lesions seen in subsequent follow-up periods should be continued to be reported on the new lesion form. Remember, when we do follow-ups, we are not recategorizing. So if it is reported as a new lesion in, let's say, cycle 2, when the follow-up scan is done in section 4, if it is still present, it should still be reported on the new lesion form. This is what the new lesion form looks like. Once again, new lesions are numbered separately from target lesions and numbered separately from non-target lesions. If not all target lesions were evaluated, then the sum of the evaluated target lesions, if the sum of evaluated target lesions shows greater than 20% increase in the smallest sum reported since baseline, you can report the sum of measured lesions. The target lesion response is then considered progressive disease, and the overall response will be considered progressive disease. If the sum of evaluated target lesions does not show a greater than 20% increase, then you would leave the sum as blank. The overall response is insufficient, and unless PD in non-target lesions or appearance of new lesions is reported, then code PD. So for example, as I said earlier, if you complete an MRI and it does show clearly progressive disease, then it's fine that not all target lesions were evaluated. You can just report PD. Baseline RECIST form for multi-step studies. So multi-step studies that use RECIST can be a little confusing, but when we complete the baseline RECIST form for multi-step studies, this is where we're going to re-evaluate all of the lesions. So when completing the baseline RECIST form for step 2 or further, all lesions should be recategorized into target and non-target lesions. So this is when we're going to look at that scan, and if, for example, the lymph nodes did decrease in size, that they would then be non-target lesions, they should be reported as such. If there are new lesions that were spotted that are measurable disease, they should be reported as a target lesion. So the step 1 baseline form may be different from the step 2 baseline form, or it might be the same based on the changes we see in the scan. If you have questions about RECIST, please make sure you email the data management team. As pointed out, there are several protocol-specific differences, so please email the study team at ECOG-ACRIN.org. For example, EA6141 team at ECOG-ACRIN.org would get you into contact with all the data managers working on EA6141.
Hi, my name is Cameron. This is my colleague, Charlene. We are members of ECOG-ACRIN's Adverse Events team, and our principal job, such, is we review every CTEPers ticket that you guys send in for any ECOG-ACRIN study. And once we're finished with it, then we will send it on to the data management team for that particular study, and they'll do a second round of review as the study experts. So today, what I thought we would go over is what those tickets look like from our point of view, and how we review them, what we look for, and point out some of the minor bloopers that we like to bother you about. So that's just the top section of a ticket. It's just a big old PDF file that contains all the data that you're entering on the CTEPers website. So what we look for, the sections that we quality control, are the subject information. Typos happen. Do we actually have the right patient attached to this EA ticket? The course information is the adverse event listed in the right cycle, and are all the dates lining up. The study agents, the description of events, that's the storytelling part of the ticket. Does that match the actual list of AEs? Then we look at the list of AEs themselves. Are they reportable? Are the attributions correct? Yeah, the attribution, complete and consistent. First up, subject information. This is, I'm just going to whip through it. It's pretty straightforward. This top section is just, that's the section of the ticket, and I'm checking it against the banner at the top of the subject homepage in RAVE. Most of the information that I need is going to be in there, and if I need extra demographic details that I want to look at, then that's in the enrollment forms over on the top left. So, but mostly it's just like the patient's initials, the gender, the birthday, and the institution, making sure all that stuff lines up. Course information, you would think this would also be super straightforward, but it has a few traps. So first up, the start date of the first course. That is the first course of the first step. And I'm checking that against cycle 1 of the treatment agent form, because day 1 of the cycle is always day 1 of treatment. Whether or not they had their clinical assessment a week ago, I'm always checking it against the treatment form. Second part of that section is the start date of the course associated with the expedited report. Also self-explanatory. Where we find the most errors is during follow-up. So your big tip is if the adverse event occurs during follow-up, then you're going to use the start date and the cycle number of the last course of treatment. So in other words, if the last cycle is cycle 9, then as far as your ticket, your AE reporting is concerned, cycle 9 goes on forever. The start date, where am I? The start date of the primary AE and the end date of the AE. So I'm just going to make sure that it actually took place during that cycle. I'm going to make sure all those dates line up. And for grade 5 events, the start date and the end date of the primary AE, that is going to be the date of death. So even if it's a grade 4 for 3 weeks, then your start date and your end date are the same. Course information, let's see, the course number on which the events occurred. So the query that I'm asking about most often here is that if you've got a multi-step trial, you've got step 1, then sometimes RAVE will say step 1, cycle 1, 2, 3, and then step 2, cycle 1, 2, 3. So it's not always going to match what you're seeing in RAVE. Sometimes you got to add them all up together, because on the ticket, you just keep counting. So it's going to be cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that is the cycle number that we want to see on your ticket. Finally, the study agents. All I want to tell you is that if the patient is on treatment, you're listing all the commercial agents in this cycle and all the investigational agents for the whole study. And the reason we're so concerned about that is that that determines what shows up in the attribution section of the ticket. Description of events. This is the narrative of the event. And there are several ways to organize this, but this CRA did a really nice job. It's broken down into the description, the diagnostics procedure, grading, and attribution. So they've just got, the patient came in on this date, they had this complaint, here's how we diagnosed it, here's what we did about it, and then here are the physician's conclusions. So we'll check that kind of thing for the HIPAA violations. Sometimes you'll have a nurse who's just politely writing, Mr. So-and-so had a headache, and then I'm like, stop that. Missing adverse events, so this might not show up on the list of events, but I see it in the description, then I'm going to query. So in this example, I've got pleural effusion, and I'm just going to query for that and see why it isn't down below. Sometimes this is just a matter of it being a distinct reportable event versus a side effect of another event that is listed. Then other discrepancies, the attribution that's different up there, or the grade is different. And some of these things are protocol specific, like some of them really want to know if the event is immune related. And the description of events is where you would say, this is an immune-related event. And then the adverse event section itself. So I'm going to hand off to Charlene.
Hello. So yeah, this is where we find the most inconsistencies between the ticket and RAVE. So what we look for at this point of when we're looking at the attributions, we go into RAVE, we make sure that the grade, the start and end dates, if they are reported in RAVE, also match, and the attribution, and the same exact adverse event. Sometimes there's a CT version 4, first version 5, which there's like a map that we can follow for that, but other than that, they should be exactly reported how they are on the ticket versus in RAVE. Yep, so we look for the term, the grade, the start date, which is all correct on this one, they all match, and the this is a big one too. So if the seriousness criteria doesn't match what is reported underneath the adverse event term, then we have to query. If it says required intervention on the ticket, but the box isn't checked in RAVE, that's a big issue as well. But then as you can see here, the attribution did not match. And sometimes this could be just a simple fix where RAVE was incorrect, so we just send a query and they update it. But if it is incorrect on the ticket, then a new amendment will have to be submitted. This outlines the seriousness criteria, which on a previous amendment, this site did not report hospitalization in RAVE, but they mentioned on the ticket, so we had to send a query, and then they submitted an amendment, and now they're correct. And then this is the example of a query that we send if the attribution is incorrect. Again, sometimes it's just simple fix in RAVE, and other times a new amendment is needed. And then if you have any questions, you can email the adverse event team at CTAP@ECOG-ACRIN.org, or you can find a bunch of pamphlets and things like that on the NCI CTAP website. And that's all.